The stars were wrong. That was the first thing Lieutenant Harry Kim noticed, not the alarms, not the sudden violent shudder that had thrown half the bridge crew from their stations, not even the eerie silence that followed the transwarp conduit collapsing behind them like a door slammed shut by an angry god. It was the stars. He had spent enough years staring at Federation stellar cartography, enough sleepless nights in astrometrics memorizing the Delta Quadrant's constellations one painful sector at a time, to know when a sky didn't match anything in memory. And this sky, this vast, indifferent sprawl of light stretching across the view screen, matched nothing. Not one cluster. Not one recognizable binary pair. Not a single pulsar signature that corresponded to any catalog Starfleet had ever compiled. Report. Captain Kathryn Janeway's voice cut through the bridge chaos with the calm precision of someone who had learned long ago that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was already in her command chair, already leaning forward, gray eyes locked on the view screen with the focused intensity of a woman who treated the impossible as a scheduling inconvenience. Tom Paris pulled himself back to the helm, running quick diagnostics with practiced hands. We're at full stop. Warp drive is offline. But Torres is already on it. Hull integrity is holding at 94%. No immediate structural damage. He paused, fingers hovering over the console. Captain, our position, I can't plot it. There's nothing in the navicomputer that matches our current stellar environment. Tuvok. The Vulcan tactical officer had not left his station. He never did. Shields are holding at full capacity. Weapons systems are operational. I am reading no immediate threat within sensor range. A pause. Brief, but Janeway had served with Tuvok long. Enough to know that a pause from him carried weight. Captain, I must report something anomalous. Our subspace communication array is functioning correctly. However, all standard Starfleet frequencies are returning silence. Not interference. Not jamming. Silence. As though there is no Starfleet network to connect to. The bridge went very quiet. Janeway stood slowly. She moved to the view screen, hands clasped behind her back, studying the star field the way a cartographer studies a map they suspect has been drawn by a liar. 7 of 9 had appeared from the aft station, her Borg-enhanced eyes moving across the astrometric overlay with mechanical precision. Even she, who had processed the navigational data of thousands of star systems assimilated across 2 quadrants, offered nothing. No match. No recognition. The transwarp conduit, Janeway said. Not a question. A reconstruction. Chakotay moved to her side. The conduit intersected with something during the transit. B'Elanna's preliminary report says the subspace geometry was, her words, aggressively wrong at the point of collapse. Like 2 incompatible wave functions trying to occupy the same space. Something was already there, Seven said. Her voice carried the flat certainty that Janeway had learned to respect. At the conduit's terminal point, there was a pre-existing subspace structure. Ancient in origin. Dormant for millions of years, but structurally intact. Our conduit interacted with it at the quantum level. The resulting resonance cascade did not destroy us. She turned from the console. It redirected us. Redirected us where? Harry asked. Seven held his gaze for a moment. Elsewhere. It was not the answer anyone wanted, but it was the honest one, and on Voyager, honest had always mattered more than comfortable. Janeway absorbed it with the stillness of someone filing it under problems to solve in sequence rather than reasons to despair. She turned back to the view screen. If you want to see more characters and crews enter impossible galaxies, hit that subscribe button and drop a name in the comments below. May the Force, may the stars, be with you. She didn't say that, of course. Janeway didn't make speeches to empty space. But the crew was watching her, and she gave them what she always gave them in moments like this: certainty. Not false certainty. Not the cheap comfort of everything will be fine. The real kind. The kind that said, I am thinking, I am working, and I will not stop. All senior staff, briefing room. 15 minutes. She turned from the view screen. Mr. Kim, keep scanning every frequency you can generate. If there is anyone in this region of space broadcasting anything, I want to hear it. She paused at the turbolift. And Harry, good catch on the stars. He blinked. Captain. You noticed before the sensors confirmed it. That's exactly the kind of attention that keeps this crew alive. The turbolift doors closed. In the briefing room, the senior staff assembled around the table with the particular energy of people who had survived enough crises together to skip past denial and move straight to problem solving. B'Elanna Torres arrived last, hair slightly singed, with a PADD full of preliminary engineering data and the expression of someone who had just found a fascinating catastrophe inside her engine room. The good news, she said, dropping into her seat, is that the warp drive will be back online within 6 hours. The conduit collapse caused a cascade failure in the plasma injectors, but nothing we can't fix. She set the PADD on the table. The complicated news is that I've been analyzing the subspace geometry of our current position, and the way subspace behaves here is different. Not dramatically, warp travel will still function. But there are subtle variances in the subspace domain frequencies that suggest we are not in our quantum reality. Silence. A parallel universe, Chakotay said. A parallel something, Torres corrected. The laws of physics are functionally identical. But the quantum signature of this continuum doesn't match ours. Whatever we interact with here, matter, energy, subspace itself, it's all running on a slightly different frequency than we're calibrated for. The doctor, appearing via his mobile holographic emitter, folded his arms with the expression of a man who felt that parallel universes were a professional discourtesy. And what does that mean for the crew, medically speaking? Nothing immediate, Torres said. Long-term exposure to a quantum misaligned continuum is, well, we don't have data on that. Because nobody's ever done it. Janeway had been listening with her coffee, which she held the way other people held lifelines. So. We are in a parallel universe, our position is unknown, our charts are useless, Starfleet cannot hear us, and the stars outside don't match anything in our database. She set the mug down. 7. The pre-existing subspace structure you detected. The one our conduit interacted with. What was it? 7 considered the question with the thoroughness she applied to everything. I cannot identify it precisely with current data. However, its quantum resonance profile suggests it was not a natural phenomenon. It was constructed by a civilization of significant technological advancement. She met Janeway's eyes. The energy signature has faint parallels to technology we encountered in the Delta Quadrant. Specifically, certain ruins and artifacts associated with a species the board designated as the Builders, the civilization you call the Ancients. The word landed on the table like a stone dropped in still water. Janeway straightened. Then this galaxy, she said quietly, may not be as empty as those stars suggest. Before anyone could respond, Harry Kim's voice came over the comm, tight with controlled excitement. Captain, you need to hear this. I found something on a low-band radio frequency. It's faint, it's fragmented, and it's going to sound impossible. A pause. It's in English. The transmission was 43 seconds long. Harry had cleaned it up as best he could, filtering out the ionic interference that clung to it like static through a dying speaker, and what remained was fragmented but unmistakable. A human voice, male, clipped with military precision. Reading what sounded like a navigational advisory. Coordinates in a system Voyager had no name for. A reference to something called the Beta Gate. A warning about Goa'uld patrol vessels operating in a sector designated only by a alphanumeric code. And then, cutting through everything else like a needle through fabric, for words that made every person in the briefing room go very still. Stargate Command, signing off. Janeway set her coffee down with extraordinary care. Play it again. Harry played it again. The second time, Tuvok listened with his eyes closed, which was how he processed audio when he wanted to strip away everything except pure data. B'Elanna was already pulling the frequency signature apart on her PADD. Seven had gone to the wall console and was running a linguistic analysis that confirmed what everyone already knew. The language was English, North American dialect, late 20th to early 21st century origin, military communications protocol. A human civilization, Chakotay said. In this galaxy. Not just human, Janeway said. Military. Organized. Operating with navigational awareness of their stellar region and apparently monitoring alien activity. She looked at Tuvok. The term they used, Goa'uld. What does our database say? Nothing, Tuvok replied, opening his eyes. The word does not appear in any Starfleet linguistic, cultural, or xenobiological record. It is entirely absent from our database. He folded his hands on the table. Which is consistent with the hypothesis that we are in a quantum distinct continuum. The civilizations here, their conflicts, their terminology, none of it overlaps with our recorded history. And yet there are humans, Neelix said from the far end of the table, his expression caught somewhere between fascination and profound unease. He had survived more alien encounters than most beings twice his age, but something about the specific strangeness of this moment. Humans, but not their humans, in a galaxy that shouldn't exist, seemed to reach him in a way that battle didn't. That seems significant. It is, Janeway agreed. It also changes our calculus considerably. She stood, moving to the viewport. Outside, the wrong stars burned with absolute indifference. We have two immediate priorities. First, we find the source of that transmission. Second, we do it carefully. She turned. Whoever these people are, they are aware enough of their surroundings to monitor alien patrol routes. That means they are operating in a hostile environment with at least basic tactical intelligence. We approach as what we are, a crew that is lost, not a force that is searching for advantage. The prime directive, Chakotay said quietly. It was not a challenge. With Chakotay, it never was. He raised it because it mattered, because he knew Janeway thought about it even when she didn't say it aloud, and because between them there existed the kind of command shorthand that made explicit what might otherwise become implicit and dangerous. Janeway exhaled slowly. The prime directive was written for our universe. For civilizations developing within the Federation's sphere of knowledge and influence. These humans, if that transmission is accurate, are already aware of alien life. Already in contact with it. Already in conflict with it. She paused. We're not going to interfere with their development, but I'm also not going to pretend we're not here. We are lost, B'Elanna needs time to repair the warp drive, and if there are humans in this galaxy who understand its geography, then opening a dialogue is not interference. It's seamanship. Nobody argued. Partly because she was right. Partly because she was Janeway. Set a course for the transmission source, she told Tom Paris as they filed back to the bridge. Best possible speed on impulse until warp comes back online. Keep shields at 50%, enough to deflect debris or minor weapons fire without reading as an aggressive posture to anyone watching. And if someone unfriendly finds us first? Tom asked. Then we introduce ourselves with phasers and manners, in that order. She settled into her command chair. Harry, keep monitoring all frequencies. I want to know the moment anything changes in our sensor environment. Tuvok. Already scanning, he said. Long-range sensors are operating at 91% efficiency. The subspace variance is creating minor degradation in our scan depth, but I am reading a great deal of activity in this region. Numerous vessels operating on what appear to be ion propulsion and Naquadah-based power systems. He looked up from his console. There is considerable traffic. This is not a quiet part of space. It took 4 hours at Impulse before the warp drive came back online. 4 hours during which the crew of Voyager did what they always did in the waiting spaces between crisis and action. They worked. They talked. They held the specific kind of busy silence that was the ship's version of collective breathing. In astrometrics, 7 rebuilt their star charts from scratch, cataloging every system within sensor range with the focused intensity of someone who treated ignorance as a personal offense. By the time Tom Paris eased Voyager to Warp 3 on B'Elanna's cautious recommendation, 7 had assembled a partial map of the surrounding region, unnamed systems, unnamed worlds, but at least a framework. A skeleton of geography to hang decisions on. It was 7 who saw them first. Captain. Her voice came over the comm with a precision that told Janeway it was important before the words did. I am reading 3 vessels on an intercept course. They are large, significantly larger than Voyager. Their power signatures are unlike anything in our database, but they are consistent with the Naquadah-based profiles Tuvok identified. They are not broadcasting any hail. They are not slowing. Janeway was on the bridge in 40 seconds. The view screen showed them clearly now, 3 enormous vessels, pyramidal in structure, gold-hulled and ancient-looking in the way that things built to last millennia looked ancient. They moved with the unhurried arrogance of vessels that had never been seriously threatened. Between them and Voyager, the distance was closing at a rate that made Tom Paris's hands tighten slightly on the helm. Shields to full, Janeway said. Hail them. Harry opened every frequency they had. 30 seconds of silence. The pyramid ships kept coming. They're powering weapons, Tuvok reported. Not alarmed, Vulcans didn't do alarmed. But with the particular precision he used when information required immediate action. Energy buildup consistent with directed energy weapons. Significant yield. I would classify them as comparable to our photon torpedo systems in destructive potential. Evasive pattern delta, Janeway said. Tom, put us at a 30-degree angle to their approach. I don't want to look like we're running, but I don't want to look like we're charging either. She leaned forward. Hail them again, all frequencies, all languages in our database. The ships fired. 3 columns of superheated plasma tore across the void between them, a weapons discharge of the kind that had apparently ended conversations in this galaxy for thousands of years. 2 columns missed as Tom Paris rolled Voyager with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years threading a ship through impossible spaces. The 3rd impacted the shields with a force that jolted the bridge and sent a shower of sparks cascading from an aft console. Shields holding at 88%, Tuvok reported. Hull integrity unaffected. Their weapons are powerful, but our shields are managing the yield. They're targeting us again, Harry said. His voice was controlled, but only just. Janeway stood. She had a policy on this, had held it for years, across 2 quadrants and more hostile encounters than she cared to count. She did not fire first. She extended every possible diplomatic option before she reached for the weapons console. But there was a line, clearly marked in her personal code, between patience and permitting her crew to be killed while she waited for civility that was never coming. They fired again. Return fire, Janeway said. Phasers only. Target their weapon systems. I want those ships unable to fire, not destroyed. Tuvok's fingers moved across the tactical console with elegant efficiency. 3 phaser beams, precise, surgical, calibrated to Voyager's exact tactical specifications, crossed the void and struck each pyramid ship's primary weapons array with the kind of accuracy that came from a Vulcan who had spent decades treating combat as an applied science. The results were immediate and dramatic. All 3 vessels lurched. 2 went to full stop. The third began venting atmosphere from a secondary hull breach that Voyager's phasers had not been aimed at, collateral damage from the weapons array explosion propagating through their own systems. The firing stopped. The silence that followed was the specific kind that meant someone on the other side was reassessing. "They're hailing us," Harry said, sounding faintly stunned. "Of course they are," Janeway said. She straightened her uniform. On screen. The face that appeared on the view screen was human, or wore a human face, which was not quite the same thing, a distinction Voyager's crew would spend the next several hours slowly and uncomfortably understanding. The man was powerfully built, dark-eyed, and dressed in elaborate golden armor that spoke of ceremony as much as combat. His expression was fury wearing the mask of divinity. Behind his eyes, something moved, a faint luminescence, subtle but unmistakable, that had no business being inside a human skull. When he spoke, his voice carried an electronic resonance that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than a human throat. "You dare," he said, "to raise weapons against the forces of Lord Huruyuar, who speaks with the authority of the gods themselves. Identify your vessel and your allegiance, or what remains of your ship will serve as a monument to your arrogance." Janeway looked at the screen for a long moment. "I'm Captain Kathryn Janeway of the Federation starship Voyager," she said. "We're explorers. We mean no harm to anyone. But I will defend my crew." She held his gaze without blinking. "I suggest we talk." Huruyuar did not talk. What he did instead was retreat. And in the particular vocabulary of power that governed this galaxy, retreat from a vessel that had just disabled 3 Hotak warships in under 90 seconds was not a tactical withdrawal. It was a message. It traveled faster than any subspace communication, rippling outward through the network of informants, spies, and terrified vassals that connected the Goa'uld System Lords to one another like a web built from fear and ambition. By the time Voyager had finished running diagnostics on their shield array and B'Elanna had catalogued the energy signature of the plasma weapons that had struck them, the message had already reached ears that Huruyuar had not intended to reach. Ears that were older, sharper, and considerably more dangerous. But that was hours away. For now, Janeway had a crew to brief and a galaxy to begin understanding. The senior staff assembled in the briefing room for the second time in 6 hours, and the atmosphere was different now, charged with the specific electricity of people who had just had their threat assessment of an unknown environment recalibrated by direct experience. Tom Paris had the slightly bright-eyed look he always got after a combat maneuver that had worked. Tuvok was as composed as carved stone, but he had already filed a complete tactical analysis of the Goa'uld Hotak's weapons and shield systems, because Tuvok treated information about things that had shot at them as a professional obligation. B'Elanna had 3 pads and the expression of an engineer who had found something that offended her on a technical level. "Their propulsion is Naquadah-based," she said, pulling up a schematic sheet reconstructed from passive sensor data. "It's a mineral we have no record of. But from what I can model, it's extraordinarily energy-dense, orders of magnitude above our standard matter-antimatter reaction in terms of raw output per unit mass. Their weapons run on it. Their shields run on it. Their ships are essentially flying reactors." She set the PADD down. "The good news is that our shields handled the yield. Our phaser geometry cut through their defensive systems faster than they could compensate. Whoever built their technology built it to be overwhelming, not precise." "Blunt instruments," Chakotay said. "Very powerful blunt instruments," Torres corrected. "I wouldn't want to take a sustained barrage from a full fleet of those things." But 1-on-1, or even 3-on-1, Voyager holds the advantage in targeting accuracy and shield geometry. For now. For now, Janeway repeated, filing the qualifier carefully. 7. The entity we spoke to. The one calling himself who you are. Your analysis. 7 had spent the intervening hours reviewing every frame of the viewscreen communication with the thoroughness she applied to Borg tactical assessments, which was to say she had essentially reverse-engineered the encounter from the cellular level upward. The individual presenting as who you are is a human host, she said. However, the bioluminescent ocular phenomenon and the vocal resonance pattern are not consistent with standard human physiology. There is a secondary biological presence within the host body, a distinct organism sharing the nervous system. The electronic resonance in the voice suggests the secondary organism possesses its own vocal apparatus, likely connected to the host's larynx. She paused. The Borg have encountered symbiotic species before. This appears to be a parasitic relationship rather than a cooperative one. The host's individual consciousness may be suppressed or entirely absent. The room absorbed that quietly. A parasite, the doctor said, with the particular distaste of a medical professional confronting something that violated his foundational principles. Using a human body as a vessel. And presenting itself as a god. It would explain the title, Chakotay said. Lord Haru you are, speaking with the authority of the gods. If you controlled enough of a population's access to technology, you could sustain that fiction indefinitely. In our universe, that would be a violation of the Prime Directive on approximately 14 separate grounds, the doctor observed. In our universe, Janeway said, we're not in. She stood and moved to the viewport again, a habit, Chakotay had long observed, that meant she was thinking in 3 dimensions rather than 2. The stars outside were still wrong, still beautiful in their alienness, still entirely indifferent to the weight of the decisions being made in this room. The transmission we intercepted mentioned Stargate Command, she said. Military designation, English language, awareness of Goa'uld patrol patterns. There are humans in this galaxy who know what these parasitic entities are and are actively working against them. She turned. That changes everything about how we proceed. We are not the only force of opposition here. We are not alone in this environment. And if there is a human organization with enough intelligence and operational capacity to monitor Goa'uld movements, then they are exactly who we need to find. Finding them may be complicated, Tuvok said. The transmission origin point, based on Harry's triangulation, places it in a system with a single inhabited planet, a world with a technological profile significantly below warp capability. If Stargate Command is operating from that world, they are doing so covertly. Approaching in a vessel of Voyager's size and power signature would eliminate their covert status immediately. Then we don't approach in Voyager, Janeway said. Tom Paris straightened slightly in his chair, which was his version of raising his hand. A shuttle, Janeway confirmed, looking at him. Small crew, low power signature, communication first approach. We find a way to make contact without announcing ourselves to everyone in the sector. She looked around the table. I'll lead the away team personally. Chakotay opened his mouth. Don't, she said, not unkindly. He closed it. They had had the argument about commanding officers on away teams approximately 30 times across the years, and the outcome had never changed. Janeway went where she needed to go. The first officer's job was to make sure Voyager was still there when she came back. Tuvok, you're with me, she continued. And 7, I need your pattern recognition on the ground. If this Stargate Command has been operating in a galaxy full of false gods and parasitic aliens, their situational awareness will be extraordinary. They'll spot deception faster than almost any civilization we've encountered. We go as what we are. And what are we, precisely? 7 asked. Not challenging, genuinely calibrating. In Seven's world, identity was a tactical variable as much as a personal one. Lost, Janeway said. Honest. And very interested in a conversation. The shuttle Cochrane left Voyager's bay 3 hours later, running on minimal power with its sensor profile reduced to the smallest footprint B'Elanna could engineer. Tom Paris, who had been left behind with visible effort, had spent 20 minutes adjusting the shuttle's thruster geometry for atmospheric entry on a world they had only partial sensor data on. The planet ahead, blue-white from this distance, achingly familiar in the way that only Class M worlds could be, grew steadily in the forward viewport as Janeway held course. Radio traffic is increasing as we enter the system, Tuvok reported from the co-pilot's seat. His tricorder was running continuous sweeps. I am detecting satellite networks in low and medium orbit, communications and surveillance platforms, consistent with mid-21st century Earth technology. They will detect our approach. Good, Janeway said. Seven looked up from her own console. There is something else. The planet's surface contains a significant subspace anomaly. Localized, stationary, and extremely powerful. Its resonance profile is, she stopped. A pause from Seven carried the same weight as a paragraph from anyone else. Captain. Its resonance profile is consistent with the pre-existing subspace structure that redirected Voyager. The ancient technology. Janeway's hands didn't move on the controls, but her focus sharpened to a point. They have ancient technology on the surface. More than that, Seven said. They appear to be operating it. Before Janeway could respond, every communication channel on the shuttle opened simultaneously, flooded with a single transmission, professional, controlled, and carrying the very specific energy of people who had seen strange things arrive from space before and had developed strong opinions about it. Unidentified vessel, this is Stargate Command. You have entered restricted airspace above a protected installation. You will reduce speed immediately and identify yourself, or we will be forced to respond with measures that will ruin everyone's afternoon. A pause. This is not our first unusual Tuesday. Despite everything, the wrong stars, the alien parasites, the impossible situation, the corner of Janeway's mouth moved. Harry would love this planet, she said quietly. Then she opened the comm, Stargate Command, this is Captain Kathryn Janeway of the Federation starship Voyager. We are not a threat. We are explorers who are very, very far from home. She paused, choosing the next words with the care of someone who understood that first impressions in hostile environments were frequently permanent. And I believe we have some things to discuss that will be mutually beneficial to both our peoples. The channel held silence for 7 seconds. Then, Captain Janeway. Please maintain your current heading. Someone will meet you on the ground. Another pause, and then, with the particular dry exhaustion of a military officer who had personally witnessed gods, wormholes, and the end of the world on multiple occasions, welcome to Earth. Try not to be alarmed by the armed reception. The shuttle entered atmosphere, trailing fire. Cheyenne Mountain did not look like the headquarters of humanity's most important secret. From the outside, it was exactly what it claimed to be, a mountain, unremarkable in the specific way that things designed to be unremarkable always were, sitting in the Colorado landscape with the quiet patience of geology. The shuttle had been guided to a landing coordinates 3 kilometers from the main entrance, in a clearing that had been cleared of trees with the deliberate efficiency of people who had needed emergency landing space before and had learned from the experience. By the time Janeway, Tuvok, and Seven stepped onto the soil of this parallel Earth, there were 12 armed soldiers in a perimeter that was professional enough to be reassuring and tight enough to be honest. The officer who stepped forward to meet them was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a face that had been weathered by the specific combination of Colorado altitude and chronic responsibility. He wore the uniform of a United States Air Force general, which Janeway recognized from historical records, and he carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that his job description contained things that no job description should contain. Captain Janeway. He extended his hand. Major General George Hammond. Welcome to Stargate Command. He looked at Tuvok, then at Seven, with the calm assessment of a man who had learned not to let his face betray his reactions. I see you've brought some, a fractional pause, varied company. My tactical officer, Tuvok, Janeway said, shaking his hand with the firm directness she used in first contacts. And 7 of 9, our astrometrics specialist. She held Hammond's gaze. General, I appreciate the welcome. I'll match your directness. We have a great deal to discuss, and I suspect time is a resource neither of us has in abundance. Hammond studied her for a moment with the eyes of a man who had met aliens wearing human faces and humans wielding alien power and had learned to look past the surface of things for the substance beneath. Whatever he found in Janeway's expression apparently satisfied some internal assessment, because he gave a single nod and gestured toward the mountain. Then let's get out of the open, he said. We've had Goa'uld surveillance drones in this sector twice this month. The elevator descent into Cheyenne Mountain took longer than expected. The facility ran deep, carved into the granite bones of the earth with the determined thoroughness of people who had decided that if the galaxy was going to come looking for them, they would prefer to be difficult to find. Janeway counted levels, noted the security checkpoints, catalogued the faces of the personnel they passed, scientists, soldiers, technicians moving with the particular hybrid urgency of people who had learned to treat the extraordinary as a working environment. They reminded her, in a way that caught her off guard, of her own crew. The same bone-deep adaptation to the impossible. The same professional calm layered over the specific alertness of people who knew the universe was larger and stranger than most of their species had been told. The briefing room they were brought to was functional and unpretentious, a large table, a window overlooking what Janeway immediately recognized as the Stargate itself, gleaming and ancient in its housing below. 7 stopped moving entirely for 3 full seconds when she saw it, which from 7 was the equivalent of an audible gasp. The subspace structure, 7 said quietly. It is a gate. We call it a Stargate, Hammond said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. Though I suspect you have questions about it that would take considerably longer than this briefing to answer. He folded his hands. Before we get to that, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Your vessel's energy signature is unlike anything we've encountered. Your shuttle's propulsion system alone is operating at a level that would make our most advanced engineers weep. And you arrived in this system without using the gate network. He looked at her steadily. So. Where did you come from, Captain? Janeway told him. She told him efficiently and honestly. The transwarp conduit experiment, the quantum displacement, the interaction with what they now understood was a dormant ancient subspace structure that had redirected them across dimensional boundaries. She told him about Voyager, about the Federation, about the Delta Quadrant and the years of displacement that had shaped her crew into the specific instrument they had become. She did not embellish and she did not minimize. Janeway had found, across years of first contacts in hostile environments, that honesty delivered with clarity was almost always more effective than strategy delivered with polish. Hammond listened without interrupting. This, Janeway noted, was the mark of someone who had heard extraordinary things before and had learned that the instinct to interrupt was usually the instinct to impose familiar frameworks on unfamiliar information, which was the single fastest way to misunderstand something important. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. A parallel universe, he said. Not skeptically. Simply verifying. A quantum distinct continuum, Tuvok confirmed. The variance in our quantum resonance signature is measurable. We do not belong to this reality. We were displaced here by an interaction between our technology and what we now understand was a dormant Stargate placed in deep space by the ancients, the species you call the ancients, millions of years ago. Something shifted in Hammond's expression at the word ancients, a flicker of recognition that opened into something broader and more complicated. He reached forward and pressed a calm button on the table. Colonel O'Neill, Dr. Jackson. Briefing room. Now. They arrived within 4 minutes, which suggested they had been nearby and possibly already informed. Colonel Jack O'Neill entered with the easy physical confidence of someone who had survived enough impossible situations to stop being surprised by them and had developed instead a kind of aggressive pragmatism toward the universe's more creative moments. Dr. Daniel Jackson followed. Younger seeming, with the particular distracted intensity of an academic who had discovered that his most outlandish theories were not only correct but dangerously underestimated. O'Neill looked at Janeway. Then at Tuvok. Then at Seven, whose Borg implants caught the briefing room lighting in a way that was difficult to process casually. So, he said. Tuesday. Colonel, Hammond said, with the tone of a man who had long ago accepted that Jack O'Neill's relationship with military decorum was creative at best. Our guests are from a parallel universe. They arrived via an interaction with an ancient deep space gate that has apparently been sitting dormant in this sector for approximately 3 million years. Jackson's eyes went wide with the specific delight of a man who spent his life at the intersection of archaeology and the impossible. A deep space gate. In this sector. He turned to Janeway. What were its coordinates? What was its construction profile? Was there a DHD or was it a bare ring? Daniel, O'Neill said. Sorry. Hi. I'm Daniel Jackson. I study the ancients. This is, he gestured broadly at the situation. This is extraordinary. Dr. Jackson, Janeway said, with the measured warmth she reserved for people whose enthusiasm she genuinely respected. I promise we will answer every question you have. But I need to understand your situation first, because 6 hours ago 3 vessels that your people apparently call Goa'uld opened fire on my ship without provocation, and I need to know what that means for the safety of my crew. The room shifted. O'Neill and Hammond exchanged a look, brief, practiced, the shorthand of people who had served together through things that had no manual. The Goa'uld, Hammond said carefully, are a parasitic species that have controlled significant portions of this galaxy for approximately 10,000 years. They operate by posing as gods to human populations transported here through the Stargate network in ancient times. They are ruled by individual system lords who control planetary territories through a combination of military force, religious manipulation, and a technology base derived primarily from knowledge and artifacts they acquired rather than developed. He paused. They are not friendly. They are not diplomatic. And the fact that your vessel disabled 3 Hatak motherships without sustaining significant damage means that within the next 24 to 48 hours, every system lord in the galaxy will know your ship exists. Haruyuar will have reported it immediately, O'Neill confirmed. He's not the type to keep embarrassing information to himself, he'll spin it as a threat that requires collective response. It gives him political leverage. He looked at Janeway with the direct assessment of a man who evaluated threats professionally. The question is whether we have more to gain from your presence here than the Goa'uld have to gain from your absence. Janeway held his gaze steadily. Colonel, I didn't come here to start a war. Captain, O'Neill said, with the specific tired humor of someone who had made that statement himself, sincerely, approximately 40 times before events proved otherwise, in this galaxy, that's generally not up to you. Below them, through the briefing room window, the Stargate shimmered, ancient, patient, humming, with the quiet power of technology that had outlasted the civilization that built it. Seven stood at the glass and looked at it with eyes that had assessed Borg cubes and spatial anomalies and the geometric perfection of transwarp conduits, and found in this ring of alien metal something that made every instrument she possessed go very, very quiet. "Captain," she said, without turning from the window. "The Stargate subspace resonance profile is not merely similar to the structure that displaced us." She paused. "It is identical. The technology that brought us here, and the technology that could potentially send us home, are the same system." The room held that information for a moment. Janeway looked at the gate. Then at Hammond. Then at O'Neill, who was watching her with the expression of a man recalculating odds in real time. "General," she said quietly, "I think our conversation just became considerably more interesting." The intelligence briefing took 3 hours. Hammond ran it with the methodical thoroughness of a commander who understood that information shared carefully was an investment, not a vulnerability, that Janeway needed to understand this galaxy's architecture if she was going to operate within it without accidentally accelerating every catastrophe SGC had spent years trying to prevent. O'Neill sat through most of it with his chair tilted back at an angle that suggested inattention but wasn't. Daniel Jackson produced 3 notebooks worth of questions directed at 7 of 9 regarding ancient technology that 7 answered with the precise efficiency of someone who found the conversation genuinely useful rather than merely obligatory. Tuvok sat perfectly still and absorbed everything with the focused silence of a Vulcan mind filing information into a tactical matrix that would be complete and cross-referenced before anyone else in the room had finished their coffee. By the end of it, Janeway understood the shape of the galaxy she had fallen into. The Goa'uld System Lords operated like feudal warlords wearing the architecture of divinity, each controlling a territory of enslaved worlds, each maintaining power through a combination of superior technology, parasitic biology, and the deliberate suppression of any knowledge that might allow their subject populations to understand they were being deceived. They had ruled this way for 10,000 years. They had done so successfully because the alternative, a galaxy that understood they were parasites in stolen bodies wielding stolen technology, was the one thing they could not survive. Truth was the only weapon that had ever genuinely threatened them, and SGC had spent years deploying it one liberated world at a time. Anubis was the complication that changed the equation. He was banished by the System Lords, Daniel explained, pulling up a holographic display that SGC's technology rendered in 2 dimensions where Voyager's would have rendered in 3 functional, but with the specific limitation of a civilization that had been working with borrowed technology for a decade rather than developing its own for centuries. Partially ascended. He found a way to access the knowledge of the ancients without fully committing to ascension, which gave him access to weapons and technology that the other System Lords can't match. He has a superweapon capable of destroying entire civilizations. He is, Daniel paused, searching for the precise word. He is the thing that keeps us awake at night. More than the other System Lords? Tuvok asked. The other System Lords want to rule, O'Neill said flatly. Anubis wants to win. There's a difference. Winning, for him, looks like everything else losing. Janeway absorbed this with the stillness she reserved for information that required immediate strategic recalibration. An partially ascended being with access to ancient knowledge and a demonstrated willingness to use weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations was not a threat category she had encountered before, not in those precise terms, but the underlying structure was familiar enough. She had met entities of vast power with limited ethics before. The Delta Quadrant had been generous with that particular category of problem. What does he know about Voyager? She asked. Hammond and O'Neill exchanged the look again. By now, O'Neill said. Everything Haruar knows. Which is that a vessel of unknown origin with weaponry more advanced than anything in the current galactic inventory appeared in this sector, disabled 3 Hotak motherships in under 2 minutes, and then disappeared from Goa'uld sensor range. He paused. Anubis has spies in every System Lord's court. He'll have the report within hours if he doesn't have it already. And unlike who you are, he won't respond with a fleet. He'll respond with curiosity first. He'll want to understand what you are before he decides how to use you or destroy you. That gives us a window, Janeway said. A small one, Hammond agreed. Small is enough. She leaned forward. General, Seven's analysis confirms that the Stargate network was built by the same civilization that constructed the deep space gate that displaced us. The ancients. Which means the network itself, its subspace geometry, its dimensional bridging capability, is directly related to the mechanism that brought us here. If we can access enough of the network's underlying architecture, there may be a way to reverse the displacement. To find the specific quantum frequency that corresponds to our universe and construct a controlled transit point. The room was quiet for a moment. You're talking about using the Stargate to get home, Daniel said. His voice carried the layered quality of someone working through implications on multiple levels simultaneously. Not the Stargate as you use it, Seven clarified. Your network operates on fixed coordinates within this universe. What we require is access to the network subspace infrastructure at a foundational level, the base code, if you will, of how the ancients constructed dimensional bridges. That information may exist in the network itself. In the oldest gates. In repositories of ancient knowledge. She looked at Daniel. You have encountered such repositories before. Daniel's expression moved through several phases rapidly. The repository of knowledge on P3R 272. The ancient database on Visubin. Yes. He looked at Hammond. If there's a way to access ancient knowledge about the gate network's dimensional bridging capacity, it exists somewhere in what we've already catalogued. Then we have two parallel objectives, Janeway said, looking at Hammond. We help you with your Anubis problem. Because a partially ascended being with a superweapon and an interest in Voyager is a problem for both of us, and in exchange, you give us access to everything you know about ancient technology and the Stargate network's foundational architecture. She paused. I'm not asking for a gift. I'm proposing an exchange of value between two peoples with aligned interests. Hammond studied her. The deliberation in his eyes was genuine. Not performance, not politics, but the real work of a commander weighing consequences that extended beyond the immediate room. He was thinking about his superiors, about the political complexity of a parallel universe starship operating in secret near Earth, about what Voyager's presence would do to the delicate balance of power that SGC had spent years maintaining. He was also, Janeway suspected, thinking about what Voyager's firepower could do to Anubis. There are people I need to consult, he said finally. The President. The Joint Chiefs. This decision is above my authority to make unilaterally. I understand completely, Janeway said. Take what time you need. She held his gaze. But General, the window Colonel O'Neill mentioned. I'd factor that into your timeline. Hammond nodded once. Colonel O'Neill will show you to quarters while I make those calls. Your tactical officer and specialist are welcome to remain and continue their conversation with Dr. Jackson. He stood. Captain, one more thing. She looked at him. The System Lords will be looking for your ship. If Voyager remains in orbit, she becomes a target and a beacon. I'd recommend moving her to a position with lower sensor visibility. He paused. We have a beta site. A Planet 2 jumps through the gate that the Goa'uld don't have on their current charts. Your ship would be safe there while we work out the details of this arrangement. Janeway considered this for precisely 3 seconds. Moving Voyager away from Earth, away from her direct command, to a location controlled by people she had met 4 hours ago, was the kind of decision that required either extraordinary trust or extraordinary calculation, and she was experienced enough to know the difference between the two. I'll have my first officer position the ship, she said. But I want a communication link maintained at all times. Commander Chakotay answers to me, not to Stargate Command. Understood, Hammond said. As O'Neill led her through the mountain's corridors toward the guest quarters that had apparently been used for enough unusual visitors to be efficiently stocked, Janeway walked with the specific internal quiet of someone cataloging problems in order of urgency. Anubis was the largest. The quantum displacement solution was the most complex. The political dynamics between SGC, the System Lords, the Takare, and the Free Jaffa were the most intricate. And somewhere beneath all of it, sitting in her awareness like a stone in a shoe, was the question she hadn't asked Hammond yet, the one she had decided to wait on until she understood his people better. The transmission they had intercepted had mentioned a beta gate. Goa'uld patrol patterns. Tactical navigational data of a specificity that suggested direct field intelligence rather than remote surveillance. Someone on the ground had been close enough to Goa'uld operations to gather that information personally. That someone was either very brave or very embedded. She filed it. O'Neill stopped outside a door and produced an access card with the air of a man performing a task he had performed for enough unusual guests to have stopped remarking on it. He handed it over and was already turning away when Janeway spoke. "Colonel." He stopped. "The Takare. Where do they fit in your current operational picture?" O'Neill's expression did something complicated. "They're allies," he said. "Mostly. They're Goa'uld who figured out that the whole false god thing was wrong and decided to fight it from the inside. They use hosts voluntarily, they share consciousness rather than suppress it, and they've got intelligence networks inside every System Lord's court." He paused. "They're also paranoid, secretive, and have a habit of deciding what information we need without asking us what information we need. So, allies with asterisks. Everything in this galaxy has asterisks," O'Neill said. He glanced back at her with the look of a man who had found, against considerable odds, something approaching respect for someone he had known for 4 hours. "Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow is going to be complicated." He walked away down the corridor. Janeway stood in the doorway of the guest quarters and looked at the access card in her hand. Earth Manufacture, Magnetic Strip, the name of a military installation printed on it in the specific font of organizations that had been classifying things for decades. She thought about Chakotay repositioning Voyager. She thought about Seven and Daniel Jackson working through ancient database architecture in a briefing room below a mountain on a parallel Earth. She thought about Anubis, partially ascended, ancient enhanced, already in motion toward the anomaly that Haruuar's embarrassment had advertised across the galaxy. She thought about the Stargate, humming in its housing below, ancient and patient and built by the same hands that had scattered technology across a delta quadrant that a lost ship from another universe had spent years navigating. The ancients, it appeared, had very long reach. She went inside and sat on the edge of the bed and opened her communicator. "Janeway to Chakotay. Chakotay here. How was Earth?" "Complicated," she said. "Move Voyager to the coordinates I'm sending. Keep shields at 30% and maintain calm silence except on our encrypted frequency." A pause. "And Chakotay, have B'Elanna run a full analysis of every ancient technology fragment in our database. Everything we encountered in the Delta Quadrant. I need to know if any of it is Stargate adjacent." A brief silence on the other end, the silence of a first officer integrating new information and deciding which question to ask first. "How complicated are we talking?" Janeway looked at the access card in her hand. "There's a partially ascended false god with a superweapon who is about to become very interested in us," she said. "And the people who've been fighting him have a network of ancient alien teleportation rings that might be our only way home." The silence this time was longer. "I'll get B'Elanna started," Chakotay said. The Takare arrived without announcement, as they always did. Janeway had been in Cheyenne Mountain for 18 hours when Hammond appeared at her quarters door with the expression of a man delivering news he had complicated feelings about. The President had approved a provisional operational agreement. Voyager would be granted access to SGC's ancient technology database in exchange for tactical support against Goa'uld aggression, terms to be defined as situations developed, language deliberately flexible in the way that language written by people who had learned to expect the unexpected always was. It was not the clean bilateral treaty that Starfleet protocol would have preferred. It was the kind of agreement that two groups of pragmatists made when they understood that the alternative to imperfect cooperation was unilateral exposure to a threat neither could manage alone. Janeway had accepted it with a handshake and a clear conscience. The Talk-RA were a different matter. There were two of them, a man and a woman, arriving through the Stargate with the particular composure of people who had been moving through enemy territory for so long that caution had become indistinguishable from personality. The man called himself Malek. The woman was Anise, though O'Neill's expression when she walked through the gate suggested a history that Janeway filed under interpersonal complications, not immediately relevant. Both carried themselves with the specific layered quality of beings sharing a body consensually, a subtle doubling in their stillness, a sense of two intelligences behind one pair of eyes that Janeway found, professionally, fascinating and personally, slightly unsettling. They had been briefed on Voyager before arriving. This was apparent from the first moment, because the Talk-RA did not waste time on surprise, they moved directly to assessment, which was their version of a greeting. Captain Janeway, Malek said, his voice carrying the faint resonance of a Goa'uld symbiote without the theatrical amplification that Haruyuar had weaponized. We have reviewed what intelligence our operatives were able to gather regarding your vessel's encounter with Haruyuar's fleet. The account is remarkable. He paused, with the particular quality of someone choosing their next word from several available options. We would like to understand your technology. I'm sure you would, Janeway said, pleasantly. I'd like to understand yours as well. That seems like a reasonable basis for a conversation. Anisa's eyes moved to 7 of 9 with the focused attention of a scientist who had identified a subject of interest. The cybernetic modifications you carry, they are not Goa'uld in origin. They are not, 7 agreed. They are Borg, Janeway said. When Anisa's expression indicated the word meant nothing, she continued. A cybernetic collective from our universe. They assimilate biological organisms and technology into a hive mind. 7 was assimilated as a child and has since been separated from the collective. She kept her voice level and factual. Her implants are her own now. Not a collective resource. Anise absorbed this with the careful attention of someone cross-referencing incoming data against existing knowledge structures. In this galaxy, there is no equivalent. The concept of a cybernetic collective of that scale, she stopped. Then, with a precision that told Janeway she was speaking for both herself and her symbiote simultaneously, it would have changed everything. It changes everything in our universe too, Janeway said. Regularly. The joint briefing that followed was conducted in SGC's main conference room with Hammond at the head, O'Neill at his right, Daniel Jackson across from Malek with a notebook already open, and Tuvok beside Janeway with his tricorder running passive scans that the Talk-RA were certainly aware of and chose not to comment on. 7 sat at the far end with the ancient database access that Daniel had arranged overnight, a direct terminal connection to SGC's most comprehensive archive of recovered ancient knowledge, and divided her attention between the conversation and the data with the practiced multitasking of someone whose neural architecture handled parallel processing as a baseline function. Malek laid out the Talk-RA intelligence picture with the efficient clarity of someone who had been doing this for a very long time. Anubis had moved. Not toward Earth, not yet. But 3 of his enhanced Hatak vessels, equipped with shields derived from ancient technology that standard Goa'uld weapons could not penetrate, had repositioned to the outer edge of the sector where Voyager had first appeared. They were holding position. Scanning. Building a picture of whatever had disabled Haruyuar's fleet with such surgical efficiency. He is not attacking, Malek said. He is studying. This is consistent with his established pattern. Anubis does not destroy what he does not understand. He acquires it first. A pause. Your vessel represents something he has not encountered in 10,000 years of operation, a technology base that is not derived from anything in this galaxy's history. He will want it. He will want to understand how it works and how it can be made to serve him. And when he finishes studying? Janeway asked. Then he will attempt to acquire it. By persuasion if possible. By force if necessary. Malek's expression carried something that was not quite human emotion and not quite absent of it, the particular affective register of a being who had spent centuries in intimate proximity to human consciousness without fully becoming it. He has acquired things by force before. He is very good at it. O'Neill leaned forward. Here's the part where I'd normally suggest we blow up whatever he's pointed at us before he gets a chance to point it more accurately. Just as a general strategic philosophy. Jack, Hammond said. It's a philosophy, sir. Not a plan. Yet. Janeway looked at the tactical display that Malek had provided Anubis's ship positions, the estimated range of their enhanced sensors, the projected timeline before his intelligence picture of Voyager became complete enough to act on. She ran the numbers with the part of her mind that had been doing this for years, and what came back was clear and not comfortable. He'll have enough information to move within 36 hours, she said. Malek nodded. Our estimate as well. Then we have 36 hours to change the equation. She looked at Hammond. General, I need Voyager repositioned. Not hidden, I want her where Anubis's scouts can see her. But on our terms, in a position we've chosen, not one he's maneuvered us into. Hammond raised an eyebrow. You want to be visible? I want to control what he sees, Janeway said. There's a difference. She turned to Tuvok. If Anubis is studying us from sensor range, what he's building is a threat assessment. He's trying to understand our capabilities and our limitations. I want to give him an incomplete picture, accurate enough that he doesn't dismiss it as deception, incomplete enough that he doesn't know what he's actually facing until it's too late. Tuvok inclined his head slightly, which was his version of appreciative. A controlled information environment. We allow him to observe what we choose to present. Exactly. She looked around the table. He knows we have weapons that can disable Hatak vessels at range. He knows our shields handled plasma weapon discharge from 3 motherships simultaneously. What he doesn't know, she paused, choosing the next words carefully, is our ammunition capacity, our crew complement, our fuel status, or our tactical doctrine. Those are the variables he needs to complete his assessment. We make sure he can't get them. And while he's watching you, O'Neill said slowly, with the expression of someone whose own tactical instincts were engaging with what Janeway was proposing, we do what, exactly? You operate, Janeway said. The TALK-RA Intelligence Network, SGC's field teams, whatever assets you have in play they keep moving. Anubis is watching Voyager. That means he's not watching you. She met O'Neill's eyes. What does he have that, if it were gone, would change the balance of this engagement? The room was quiet for a moment. It was Anise who answered, with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this question. He has a command ship, she said. A vessel of his own construction, incorporating ancient shield technology. It is how he destroyed Abydos. It is the platform from which he directs his fleet. She paused. Our operatives have been attempting to locate its current position for 8 months. 7, Janeway said. 7 looked up from the ancient database terminal. She had been listening to the entire conversation while simultaneously processing 3,000 years of recovered ancient technological records, which was precisely why Janeway had brought her. The ancient database contains navigational records, 7 said. Incomplete, but structured on a subspace geometry that I am now able to partially interpret. If Anubis's command ship incorporates ancient shield technology, it will have a subspace resonance signature distinct from standard Goa'uld power systems. She looked at Anise. If you can provide me with sensor data from any previous encounter with his command ship, I can construct a resonance profile and use the ancient navigational records to extrapolate his current position. Anis looked at Malek. The exchange between them was silent and lasted approximately 2 seconds. Long enough for two consciousnesses sharing one body to reach a consensus. "We have sensor data," Anis said. "From an operative who did not survive the encounter in which it was gathered." A pause that carried genuine weight. "It will be made available." The briefing continued for another hour, building the skeleton of something that was not quite a plan but was more than a hope. The kind of operational framework that people construct when they have incomplete information and limited time, and the alternative to construction is paralysis. Janeway contributed Voyager's tactical capabilities with the precise honesty she applied to everything, neither underselling nor overstating. She told them what her ship could do, and what it couldn't. She told them about phaser range and torpedo yield and shield geometry, and the specific vulnerability that sustained fire from multiple capital ships would eventually create regardless of their technological advantage. She told them about her crew. Not their personal histories, but their capabilities, their adaptability, the specific quality of people who had spent years finding ways home through a hostile universe and had developed in the process a collective competence that was greater than the sum of its parts. O'Neill listened to all of it with the expression of a man recalibrating an assessment upward. It was late in the afternoon, Colorado time, when Janeway found a moment alone in the corridor outside the briefing room. She stood at a viewport that looked down into the gate room, where the Stargate stood in its silent patience, and she thought about Seven at the ancient database terminal, processing records of a civilization that had built both the network below her and the dormant gate that had pulled Voyager across dimensional boundaries. The same hands. The same minds. Separated by millions of years and an act of universe-spanning engineering that had been sitting in deep space like a forgotten letter, waiting for someone to come along with the right kind of displacement to trigger it. She thought about B'Elanna on Voyager, running analyses of every ancient artifact they had encountered in the Delta Quadrant. She thought about the years they had spent out there, navigating by dead reckoning through a quadrant that nobody from home had ever mapped, finding their way through impossible situations one decision at a time. She had gotten them home once before. She would do it again. Behind her, she heard O'Neill's footsteps. She had learned his gait in 18 hours, which was the kind of thing you learned about people you might need to rely on. "The Takare data on Anubis's command ship," he said, stopping beside her. "Anis flagged something after you left. The resonance signature 7 identified. It's not just ancient shield tech." Janeway turned. "The power source driving those shields," O'Neill said, with the expression of a man delivering information that he hadn't fully processed yet himself. "According to the operative's sensor data, it's a Stargate. He's powering his command ship's shields with a functional Stargate." Janeway looked back at the ring below them. "He found a way to weaponize the network," she said quietly. "Yeah." O'Neill was quiet for a moment. "Still want to change the equation?" "More than ever," Janeway said. The mission had seemed straightforward. That was, Tuvok had observed over many years of service, frequently the first indicator that it was not. The intelligence Anis provided led to a Goa'uld-controlled World 3 jumps through the Stargate network. A planet designated P2X887 in SGC's cataloging system, called Delmac in the older Goa'uld territorial records that Daniel Jackson had spent the night translating with the focused intensity of a man who considered sleep an inefficient use of crisis time. It was a minor Goa'uld administrative world. Not a seat of power, not a military stronghold, but the kind of mid-tier operational node that empires required to function and rarely fortified aggressively because the value of fortification was proportional to the perceived threat, and nobody had ever perceived Delmac as worth attacking seriously. That assessment was about to change. Anissa's operative had died gathering sensor data that suggested Anubis was using Delmac's Stargate as a remote power relay, siphoning energy from the gate's subspace connection to feed the shield matrix on his command ship across the network. It was the kind of engineering that required not just knowledge of how the Stargate network functioned at a foundational level, but the specific partially Ascended insight to see that it was possible in the first place. Standard Goa'uld understanding of the network was operational. They used the gates to move troops and supplies and assert territorial control. Anubis understood the network the way an architect understands a building, not just where the doors were, but where the load-bearing walls ran. Severing the relay would not destroy his command ship's shields. But it would force him to find an alternative power source, which would take time, and time, in the current operational picture, was the resource everyone needed most. The team went through the gate at 0400 Colorado time. O'Neill led. He had insisted, with the particular immovability of a field commander who had earned the right to be immovable, and Janeway had recognized the territorial logic of it without resentment. This was his galaxy, his network, his team's operational environment. She had negotiated herself onto the mission on the clear understanding that she was there as a tactical asset and collaborative partner, not a competing authority. Tuvok accompanied her, carrying a Starfleet tricorder that had been recalibrated overnight to detect Naquadah-based energy signatures and was now, B'Elanna had confirmed, the most sensitive Naquadah sensor in the galaxy by approximately 3 orders of magnitude. The rest of the team was SG-1. O'Neill, Daniel Jackson, who had come despite O'Neill's protests and Hammond's resigned acceptance, and Samantha Carter, whose arrival at the gate room had recalibrated Janeway's assessment of SGC's technical capabilities in approximately 4 minutes of conversation. Carter was the kind of scientist-soldier combination that Starfleet produced intentionally and other militaries produced accidentally. Someone who understood the physics of what she was fighting with the same depth that she understood how to fight with it, and who had the particular quality of a mind that found solutions in spaces where other minds found only problems. She and Tuvok had exchanged precisely 6 sentences before the gate activation and had achieved what Janeway recognized as the specific rapport of 2 people who had identified each other as worth listening to. Delmac was dry and red-earthed, with a sky the color of old copper and vegetation that grew in low, thorn clusters across a landscape that seemed to have decided long ago that beauty was an unnecessary expenditure of resources. The Stargate stood on a raised platform of ancient stone, surrounded by the administrative architecture of a Goa'uld minor holding, functional, imposing, built to communicate authority rather than inhabit it. Jaffa patrols moved in the middle distance with the regularity of guards who had not been threatened in long enough to have made peace with routine. 12 Jaffa on the outer perimeter, O'Neill said quietly, reading from a modified life signs detector. Gate platform has 4. The relay station, Sam, where are we on that? Carter was already scanning with a device she and Tuvok had modified together in 40 minutes that morning, combining her Naquadah sensor with his tricorder subspace geometry mapping. The result was a hybrid instrument that neither of their respective technologies could have produced alone, a fact that both of them had noted with professional satisfaction and neither had commented on further, because there was work to do. 50 meters northwest of the gate platform, Carter said quietly. Underground installation, looks like a converted power distribution hub. The subspace relay is running continuous, low-intensity energy draw from the gate. If I didn't know what to look for, I'd have read it as background noise. She looked at Tuvok. The Naquadah resonance masking on this thing is impressive. It is designed to be invisible to standard Goa'uld sensors, Tuvok agreed. Which suggests Anubis did not want his fellow system lords to know what he was doing with their network. Shocking, O'Neill said. A Goa'uld keeping secrets. Daniel, stop looking at the architecture. Daniel looked up from the carved stonework of the gate platform with the expression of a man interrupted mid-thought. It's pre-imperial period construction. This installation is at least 4,000 years old, which means we admire it later. Move. They moved through the perimeter with the practiced efficiency of a team that had done this enough times to have internalized the choreography, O'Neill reading the patrol patterns, Carter and Tuvok navigating by the hybrid sensor, Daniel managing the gate access codes they would need for extraction, Janeway maintaining the broader situational awareness that came from years of keeping a crew alive in hostile environments. She noted the Jaffa patrol timing. She noted the sight lines from the administrative towers. She noted the 3 cargo ships on a landing platform to the east, which meant Goa'uld personnel beyond the patrol complement, which meant their window for undetected operation was smaller than the pre-mission estimate. She noted all of this and said nothing, because O'Neill had already noted all of it and adjusted accordingly, and the most dangerous thing an attached commander could do in a field operation not their own was provide commentary that consumed attention without adding value. They reached the relay station entrance. A recessed hatch in the red earth, sealed with a Goa'uld locking mechanism that Carter bypassed in 90 seconds while Tuvok held the sensor and O'Neill held the perimeter with the specific stillness of a man who had learned to become very small when the situation required it. The installation below was compact and extraordinarily sophisticated. A chamber perhaps 15 meters across, lined with the crystalline circuitry of ancient design that had been overlaid with Goa'uld modifications in the way that a crude translation overlays an original text. Functional, but losing something essential in the conversion. The relay mechanism itself was a column of controlled subspace energy, drawing from the gate above through a connection that Seven had theorized and Carter had confirmed and which both of them, in their separate ways, found simultaneously elegant and deeply troubling. If we disrupt this, Carter said, crouching beside the relay column with her scanner, Anubis loses his power feed. But the disruption will register on his command ship systems immediately. He'll know someone hit the relay. Can we make it look like a malfunction? O'Neill asked. Not with the time we have. Carter looked at Janeway. Your ship's phasers, could they produce a localized subspace pulse at a frequency that would read as spontaneous equipment failure rather than directed attack? Janeway considered. Tuvok. The phaser array can be modulated to produce a subspace disruption pulse, Tuvok said. The frequency calibration would need to match the relay's operational signature closely enough to suggest internal cascade failure. B'Elanna could manage the modulation from Voyager. He paused. However, Voyager would need to be within range of this planet to deliver the pulse accurately. Which means moving her from the beta site. Which means Anubis's scouts see her move, O'Neill said. Yes, Janeway said. But if we time it correctly, the relay failure registers at the same moment Anubis's attention is on Voyager's repositioning. 2 events competing for his analytical attention. Neither one tells him the complete story. O'Neill looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who had just heard their own tactical philosophy stated by someone else and wasn't sure whether to be impressed or unsettled. Misdirection, he said. Seamanship, she replied. They were still working through the timing when Seven's voice came through Janeway's communicator, strong and clear despite the gate network's interference, because B'Elanna had spent the previous night recalibrating their encrypted channel to punch through exactly this kind of subspace noise. Captain. Seven's voice carried the specific quality of someone delivering important information with controlled urgency. I have been working through the ancient database records with Dr. Jackson's prior translations as a reference framework. I have found something that significantly alters our operational picture. Go ahead, 7. The ancient navigational records contain references to a class of installation designated in their language as a correlative update archive. A facility designed to store the complete operational history of the Stargate network, including every gate address ever dialed, every subspace bridge ever opened, and every dimensional transit ever recorded. A pause. Captain, if such an archive exists and is intact, it would contain a record of the dimensional transit that brought Voyager here. It would contain the precise quantum frequency of our universe of origin. Every parameter we need to construct a controlled return transit. Janeway was very still. Location, she said. The records reference a planet in this sector, 7 said. However, the planet is not currently uninhabited. Another pause, carefully weighted. According to TalkRA intelligence records that Dr. Jackson cross-referenced this morning, it is currently the base of operations for Anubis. The chamber was very quiet. Daniel's voice came through the communicator behind Seven's, unable to contain itself entirely. It gets slightly more complicated. The archive installation, based on the architectural descriptions in the ancient records, it's not on the planet's surface. It's in the planet's orbit. It's a space station. An ancient space station that Anubis has been using as his primary command post. O'Neill looked at Janeway. Janeway looked at the relay column. Well, she said, with the measured calm of someone who had learned that the universe's habit of nesting complications inside complications was simply the cost of operating at its frontier. That does change things. Then the alarm klaxon started. Above them, through the relay chamber ceiling, the sound of staff weapon fire erupted across the surface of Delmac, sharp, bright discharges of energy that meant the Jaffa patrol had found something, or someone had made a sound they shouldn't have, or the universe had simply decided that the window was closing. O'Neill was already moving toward the ladder. Change things later, he said. Run now. They came out of the hatch running. The surface of Delmac had transformed in the 4 minutes they had been underground. What had been a quiet administrative world with predictable patrol patterns was now a coordinated response, Jaffa moving in disciplined formation from 3 directions with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had done this before and knew that hesitation was the enemy of survival. Staff weapons discharged in bright pulses of amber energy, tearing into the red earth around the team as O'Neill returned fire with the specific economy of someone who understood that every shot needed to mean something when you were outnumbered and the gate was 50 meters away. Tuvok fired his phaser on stun setting. Clean, precise beams that dropped Jaffa without killing them, which was the Starfleet default and which O'Neill accepted without comment because results were results and the Jaffa were hitting the ground either way. Janeway pulled her own phaser and covered the left flank, dropping 2 warriors who had moved to cut off the gate approach, while Carter worked the right side with her P-90 and Daniel Jackson, who was emphatically not a soldier and never pretended otherwise, managed the DHD with focused urgency, entering the gate address for home with the careful speed of someone who understood that a single wrong symbol was a very permanent mistake. 15 seconds, Daniel called. We have company from the east, Carter reported. A cargo ship was lifting from the landing platform, not a warship, but large enough to carry a Jaffa complement significant enough to make the next 90 seconds very complicated. Janeway looked at the cargo ship. Then at her communicator. Then at Tuvok, who had already reached the same conclusion. Voyager, she said, opening the channel. Chakotay here. His voice was immediate. He had been monitoring, as she had known he would be, because in 7 years of service together they had developed the particular operational synchronicity of people who had survived enough crises to learn each other's rhythms at a molecular level. Target the cargo ship lifting from our position. Minimum yield, disable, don't destroy. Now. A pause of approximately 2 seconds, long enough for Chakotay to reposition for firing solution, short enough that Janeway didn't have time to count them consciously. Then the sky above Delmac split open. Voyager dropped from high orbit at full impulse, moving with the elegant aggression of an Intrepid-class vessel pushed by a helmsman, Tom Paris. She recognized the signature of it, who understood exactly how much punishment the hull could take from atmospheric entry at that speed. The ship leveled at 15 kilometers altitude and fired 2 phaser bursts. Surgical, precise, calibrated by B'Elanna's hand on the weapons console to the exact yield required to disable a Goa'uld cargo vessel without detonating its Naquadah power core. The cargo ship dropped back to the platform, hard but intact. Gates open, Daniel said. They went through. The gate room at Cheyenne Mountain had never looked so unremarkable or so welcome. Hammond was waiting, with the expression of a man who had been informed that his operational timeline had just been compressed by events on the ground. We have a problem, O'Neill said, which Hammond's expression indicated he had already been informed of, because Carter had been transmitting compressed sensor data throughout the mission and SGC's analysis team had been working in parallel. Several, Hammond agreed. Anubis's scouts repositioned while you were on Delmac. He's moving faster than the 36-hour estimate. Our current projection puts his response window at 18 hours, possibly less. The relay, Janeway said. Did Voyager's pulse work? B'Elanna Torres transmitted the subspace disruption pulse during our exfil, Tuvok confirmed, checking his tricorder. The relay column showed cascade failure signatures consistent with internal equipment malfunction. The disruption registered on Anubis's command ship systems simultaneously with Voyager's orbital repositioning. So he has two things to think about, Carter said. The relay failure and Voyager's movement. Neither one tells him what actually happened. It buys us time, Janeway said. Not much. But some. She looked at Hammond. General, we need to talk about the ancient archive. The briefing that followed was the most concentrated hour of strategic planning Janeway had participated in since the worst years of the Delta Quadrant, a room full of people with different knowledge bases and different operational philosophies trying to build a coherent response to a threat that none of their individual frameworks was sufficient to address alone. Seven presented the archive findings with her characteristic precision, projecting the ancient database references onto SGC's display systems in a format that Carter translated into SGC's analytical framework in real time, the two of them working in a collaborative shorthand that had apparently developed overnight without anyone formally arranging it. The archive was real. The location was confirmed. And it was, as Daniel had indicated, aboard an ancient space station in orbit of Anubis's primary base of operations, a facility the Tok'ra designated as Tartarus, a world Anubis had fortified so extensively that no SGC team had ever approached it without catastrophic loss. The station itself, Seven said, highlighting the orbital path in the display, is ancient construction, approximately 10 million years old by my estimate from the database records. Anubis did not build it. He found it and claimed it, as he claims everything, by understanding it well enough to use it before anyone else understood it well enough to stop him. She looked at the room. The archive is in the station's lower levels. Based on the architectural records, it would be accessible through a secondary docking port on the station's ventral surface, a port designed for ancient shuttle craft, not Goa'uld ships. Which means his people probably haven't used it, Carter said, following the logic. If it's not compatible with their ship profiles, they might not even know it's there. Or they know and consider it inaccessible, Tuvok added. An ancient docking port would require an energy compatibility that Goa'uld technology cannot provide. But Voyager can, Janeway said. Our shuttlecraft power signatures are derived from technology with sufficient compatibility with ancient systems, Seven confirmed. Based on encounters in the Delta Quadrant, Federation EPS systems produce energy patterns that ancient-designed interfaces respond to. The docking port would recognize our shuttle as a compatible vessel. O'Neill leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of a man whose tactical instincts were engaged in vigorous internal debate. So the plan is to fly a shuttle to Anubis's most heavily fortified installation, dock with an ancient port his people don't know about, walk through a 10-million-year-old space station to find a room full of ancient data, download whatever we need to get you home, and leave before he notices. That is a simplified version, Tuvok said. It's also insane, O'Neill said. Which in my experience means it has a reasonable chance of working. He looked at Janeway. Assuming Voyager can keep Anubis's fleet busy enough that his station defenses are looking outward rather than inward. That was going to be my next point, Janeway said. The plan that assembled itself over the following 2 hours was built from the same material all good plans were built from, the honest assessment of available assets, the clear identification of critical path dependencies, and the collective acceptance that several components would not survive contact with reality and would require improvisation when they failed. Voyager would position herself in the outer system of Tartarus, visible and aggressive, drawing the attention of Anubis's Hatak fleet and forcing his defensive posture to orient outward. The shuttle Cochrane, running on minimal power with its energy signature masked by a modification B'Elanna had developed using the quasi-resonance principles borrowed from Carter's technical files, would approach the station from below during the engagement. Seven would access the archive. Tuvok would manage the tactical picture from the shuttle. Janeway would lead the boarding. O'Neill had proposed sending SG-1 instead. Janeway had listened to the proposal respectfully and declined it on 3 precise grounds. The shuttle required Federation energy compatibility, the archive would be in ancient language that Seven's Borg-enhanced processing could translate faster than any human linguist, and the extraction window would be measured in minutes, not hours. O'Neill had listened to the counter-proposal with the expression of a man who recognized when he was being out-argued and had the professional honesty to acknowledge it. "You come back," he said. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something in the middle that Janeway recognized as the language of people who had learned to care about the survival of colleagues they had known for less than 48 hours because in this environment, 48 hours was long enough. "That's the plan," she said. It was in the final hour of preparation that the doctor appeared in the briefing room doorway with his mobile emitter active and the expression of a holographic physician who had been pursuing a line of medical and scientific inquiry and had arrived at a conclusion that he considered too significant to wait. "I've been analyzing the biological data from our encounter with Haruar," he said, without preamble, because the doctor's relationship with preamble was optional at the best of times and non-existent when he had something important to say. Specifically, the secondary organism. The symbiote. "I've been cross-referencing with the Tok'ra biological profiles that Anise provided." He looked around the room with the particular expression of a man about to reframe something everyone thought they understood. The symbiote's neural interface with its host, the mechanism by which it suppresses or communicates with the host's consciousness, operates on a bioelectric frequency that is, in several key parameters, identical to a Borg neural link. The room was very quiet. "Identical?" Seven said. "The underlying principle," the doctor clarified. "Not the technology. Not the execution. But the foundational bioelectric architecture, the way one consciousness interfaces with and influences another at the neural level, the Goa'uld symbiote and the Borg neural link are solving the same problem with different tools." He paused. "Which means, theoretically, that Seven's existing Borg neural interface hardware might be capable of establishing a communication channel with a Goa'uld symbiote." "Communication," Janeway said carefully. "Or disruption." The doctor's expression carried the specific quality of a physician who had considered the ethical dimensions of his discovery and arrived somewhere complicated. "Both," he said. "Theoretically. At close range, Seven's neural interface could potentially disrupt a symbiote's control over its host, temporarily restoring the host's autonomous consciousness. Or, with the symbiote's cooperation, establish a direct communication channel that bypasses the host entirely." He looked at Seven. "It would require physical proximity. And it would be," he searched for the word, "uncomfortable. For everyone involved." Seven absorbed this with the stillness of someone cataloging a capability she had not previously known she possessed and determining how she felt about possessing it. "Anubis," Janeway said. "He's partially ascended. He may not have a conventional host relationship." "No," the doctor agreed. "But his Jaffa do. And his underlords do. And if there are host individuals aboard that station whose symbiotes could be disrupted, their hosts could be freed," Tuvok said. "Temporarily," the doctor emphasized. "The disruption would not be permanent without removing the symbiote. But it would create a window of confusion in any Goa'uld personnel aboard the station that could be operationally significant." Janeway looked at Seven. Seven met her eyes with the particular quality of someone who had spent years reclaiming her individuality from a collective that had suppressed it, and who understood with perfect personal clarity what it meant to have your autonomous consciousness temporarily restored. "I will manage it," Seven said quietly. Outside the briefing room windows, Colorado evening was settling over the mountain with the indifferent beauty of a world that had been spinning through its crises long before Stargate Command existed and would continue spinning long after. Somewhere above the atmosphere, Voyager held her position with Chakotay on the bridge and B'Elanna in engineering and Tom Paris at the helm. Her crew, her ship, the people she had brought across a universe and a dimensional boundary and intended to bring home. Janeway stood and looked at the operational display one final time. Tartarus, the station, the archive, the route the Cochrane would take through Anubis's blind spot. She thought about the ancients, a civilization that had built a network spanning a galaxy, seeded technology across multiple quadrants, and then ascended to a higher plane of existence, leaving their works behind like a library no one had finished reading. She thought about what it meant that their technology had reached across dimensional boundaries to pull a lost ship into this galaxy. She thought about Seven's discovery in the ancient database, and the Doctor's discovery in the biological data, and the way this mission had accumulated complications the way stars accumulated gravity, naturally, inevitably, each new element drawing the next into orbit. Then she picked up her phaser, checked the charge, and holstered it. "We leave in 2 hours," she said. "Get some rest." Nobody did. Tartarus was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. From the Cochrane's forward viewport, the planet turned slowly in the light of its distant star, a world of deep violet oceans and black continental shelves, ringed by the debris field of civilizations that Anubis had consumed over decades of expansion. The debris caught the starlight and scattered it in slow geometric patterns, as though the universe was trying to make something graceful out of what had been nothing but destruction. Above the planet, Anubis's fleet held formation with the disciplined geometry of absolute power, 12 Hatak motherships in layered defensive rings, and at the center of the formation, the command ship. Ancient station, claimed and modified, running on a stolen Stargate's power and the architectural genius of a civilization that had been dead for 10 million years. It was enormous. Janeway had known it would be large. The ancient database records had given dimensions, and Seven had translated them, and the numbers had been significant. But numbers on a screen and the thing itself, hanging in space with the calm permanence of something that had outlasted every war ever fought in this galaxy, were different experiences entirely. The station was not built in the angular aggressive geometry of Goa'uld design. It was curved, organic in its complexity, with the flowing structural logic of a civilization that had understood physics deeply enough to stop fighting it and start working with it instead. Beautiful. And currently surrounded by enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble. "Voyager is in position," Tuvok reported from the co-pilot's seat, his voice carrying the steady precision of a Vulcan who had decided that the current situation, while extremely dangerous, was within calculable parameters. "Commander Chakotay is holding at the system's outer boundary. He is visible on Anubis's long-range sensors." "Confirmed." "And they're watching her," Janeway said. "All 12 Hatak vessels have oriented their sensor arrays toward Voyager's position. The station's external defensive systems are likewise oriented outward." Tuvok checked the tricorder readings that Carter and B'Elanna had calibrated together the previous evening. The ventral docking port is on the station's shadow side relative to the current fleet orientation. "We have a sensor blind spot of approximately 40 meters surrounding the port." 40 meters, Janeway said. "It is sufficient," Seven said from the aft station, with the confidence of someone who had navigated a Borg cube's regeneration alcoves in complete darkness and considered 40 meters of sensor shadow a generous operational window. Tom Paris, who had argued for 20 minutes to be included on the shuttle crew and had lost the argument to B'Elanna's need for him on Voyager's helm and Chakotay's requirement for their best pilot in the command chair during the engagement, had set the Cochrane's approach vector with the precision of someone determined to prove, from a distance, leaving him behind had been the wrong call. The shuttle was running on the absolute minimum power output that still maintained life support, its Naquadah resonance masking active, moving through the debris field with the slow patience of a piece of debris itself, no active propulsion, just carefully calculated drift on a trajectory that would bring them to the ventral docking port in 23 minutes. 23 minutes of silence and calculation and the specific quality of waiting that Janeway had learned to inhabit over years of command, not passive, not tense, but the active stillness of a mind that had prepared everything it could prepare and was now managing the gap between preparation and action. Then Chakotay made his move. Voyager dropped to warp inside the system boundary. Not toward the fleet, but across it, a lateral burn that crossed the Hatak formation sensor arc at warp 2 and then decelerated to impulse with the deliberate visibility of a vessel that wanted to be seen. It was an old maneuver, older than the Federation, the fundamental language of naval provocation. I am here, I am not afraid, come and deal with me. In Janeway's universe it was called a fighting pass. In this galaxy it apparently had no name, because nothing had ever done it to a Goa'uld fleet before and lived to establish terminology. 3 Hatak vessels broke formation immediately, vectoring toward Voyager with the instinctive aggression of predators responding to movement. The remaining 9 held position around the station, which was correct tactical behavior. You did not abandon your primary asset to chase a single vessel, but the 3 that moved were enough. Enough sensor arrays reorienting. Enough attention redirecting. Enough. Now, Janeway said. Tuvok engaged the Cochrane's impulse drive at minimum output and the shuttle moved, precise, controlled, threading through the last 100 meters of debris field toward the ventral docking port with the careful accuracy of a vessel being flown by someone who had spent years threading a shuttlecraft through conditions that would have destroyed a less experienced pilot. The docking port was exactly where the ancient record said it would be. A recessed interface in the station's lower hull, its geometry unmistakably ancient in the way that all ancient engineering was unmistakable once you had learned to recognize its aesthetic signature. The port's surface was dark, dormant, showing no active power. 7 moved to the shuttle's forward interface panel and began transmitting the compatibility signal she had derived from the ancient database records, a specific energy frequency that the port was designed to recognize. For 4 seconds, nothing happened. Then the port illuminated. Soft, blue-white light running along geometric channels in the hull surface, ancient systems waking from dormancy with the unhurried confidence of technology that had been waiting millions of years and found the concept of urgency somewhat beneath it. The docking interface extended, connected with the Cochrane's forward coupling, and the shuttle was drawn smoothly into a docking bay that had not been used since the ancients themselves had last walked these corridors. "We're in," Tuvok said. The station interior was dark and cold and magnificent. Janeway had walked through ancient ruins in the Delta Quadrant, the fragmentary remains of a civilization that had touched more of the universe than any other species in recorded history. Those ruins had been exactly that, ruins, broken and partial, their original coherence legible only in fragments. This was different. The station had been maintained, not by the ancients, who were gone, but by the station's own automated systems, running on the Stargate power relay for 10,000 years, keeping the fundamental structure intact with the patient efficiency of engineering built to last. The corridors were intact. The lighting systems responded, dimly, to their presence. The air was cold but breathable, recycled for millennia by atmospheric systems that had simply never stopped. Goa'uld modifications were visible in the upper levels. Crude overlays of Naquata conduit and staff weapon mounts bolted onto ancient walls with the aesthetic sensibility of someone who had acquired a cathedral and decided to use it as a barracks. Below those modifications, the original station spoke a different language entirely. 7 moved ahead, navigating by the schematic she had memorized from the ancient database records, her Borg-enhanced processing translating the station's layout in real time. Tuvok followed with his phaser drawn, scanning for life signs with a tricorder that told them 3 things immediately. The station's occupied levels were above them, the Goa'uld personnel complement was approximately 40 individuals clustered in the upper third of the structure, and the archive was 2 levels below their current position and completely unoccupied. They reached it in 11 minutes. The archive chamber was circular, perhaps 30 meters in diameter, with a central interface column of ancient crystal that rose from floor to ceiling like the spine of something vast and patient. Data storage nodes lined the walls in geometric arrays, their surfaces carrying the faint luminescence of systems that had been running continuously for longer than human civilization had existed. The air in the chamber was different from the corridors. Warmer, drier, carrying the specific quality of a room that had been sealed and climate-controlled with deliberate precision. Seven went directly to the central interface column and placed both hands on its surface. The column responded immediately, light cascading upward through the crystal in patterns that were not decorative but functional, the visual expression of a data retrieval system initializing after a very long sleep. Text appeared on surfaces around the chamber, ancient script flowing in columns that Seven read with the focused intensity of a mind that had been preparing for exactly this moment since she first identified the archive's existence in the database records. "The archive is intact," she said. "Complete operational history of the Stargate network. Every gate address dialed. Every subspace bridge opened." Her eyes moved rapidly across the flowing text. "Every dimensional transit recorded." "Find ours," Janeway said. "I am." Seven's hands moved on the interface, navigating through data structures with practiced efficiency. The archive catalogs dimensional transit separately from standard gate operations. There is a dedicated index. The ancients apparently conducted dimensional research extensively. A pause. "I have located the transit. Our transit. The interaction between Voyager's transwarp conduit and the deep space gate." She looked up briefly. "The quantum frequency of our universe of origin is recorded here. Complete. Precise. Every parameter required to construct a controlled return transit." Janeway felt something release in her chest, not tension, exactly, because she had not allowed herself to carry tension about this, but something adjacent to it. The specific relief of a navigator who has been sailing by dead reckoning and has just sighted a known landmark. "Download everything," she said. "Archive records, dimensional transit data, all of it." "Downloading," Seven confirmed. It was Tuvok who heard at first the particular acoustic signature of Goa'uld technology activating in a space where it had not been active before. He turned from the chamber entrance, tricorder already reading. "Captain. We have been detected." His voice was level. "For Jaffa, descending from the upper levels. They will reach this corridor in approximately minutes." He looked at the tricorder. "There is also a second energy signature. Distinct from the Jaffa. Moving faster." He paused. "It is not Goa'uld. It is not human. It is." The chamber entrance darkened. Anubis did not walk through doorways the way other beings walked through doorways. He moved through the space where a doorway was with the specific quality of something that had not fully committed to physical existence. Present and not present simultaneously, his form carrying the half-translucent shimmer of partial ascension. He was vast in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. He looked at the three of them with eyes that held the accumulated experience of 10,000 years of godhood and the ancient knowledge of a civilization that had understood the universe at a level that no currently embodied being could fully access. He looked at the archive column. At Seven's hands on the interface. At the data flowing through the crystal in patterns that he understood perfectly. "You have found my archive," he said. His voice was not the theatrical resonance of a system lord performing divinity. It was quieter than that, and considerably more dangerous. "And you understand what it contains." He regarded Janeway with the focused attention of something ancient evaluating something new. "You are not from this galaxy." "No," Janeway said. Her phaser was in her hand. She knew it was insufficient. She held it anyway, because insufficiency was not the same as futility, and because she had faced things that outmatched her before and had learned that the response to being outmatched was not surrender but adaptation. "You came through dimensional transit," Anubis said. It was not a question. "Through the deep space gate." He moved, not walked, moved. Further into the chamber, examining the archive interface with the proprietary attention of a being who considered everything he could use to be already his. "I detected the transit when it occurred. I have been waiting to understand its source." He looked at Voyager's captain with something that might, in a different kind of being, have been curiosity. "Your technology is remarkable. Your vessel's power systems operate on principles this galaxy has not developed. Your weapons cut through Hatak shielding as though it were not there. A pause. You would be an extraordinary asset. I'm not available, Janeway said. Something that was not quite amusement moved through Anubis's expression. Everything is available, he said. Given sufficient motivation. 7, Janeway said quietly. Status. Download at 63%, 7 said. She had not moved her hands from the interface. Her voice was steady. I require 90 seconds. Anubis looked at 7 with the specific attention of a being who had just noticed something unexpected. His gaze moved to her Borg implants, cataloging them with the rapid assessment of an intelligence that processed new information very quickly. The cybernetic modifications, he said. They are not of this galaxy either. Their energy signature, he stopped. And 7 looked up from the interface and met his eyes. What happened next lasted approximately 3 seconds and was not visible to Janeway or Tuvok in any conventional sense. But 7's Borg neural interface, the hardware that the Doctor had identified as operating on bioelectric frequencies analogous to Goa'uld symbiote neural links, made contact with the energy field that constituted Anubis's partial existence. Not communication. Not disruption. Something more precise than either a read. The Borg had spent centuries developing the ability to assess and catalog the neural architecture of every species they encountered. 7 carried that capability in her implants like a library card to the most extensive xenobiological database in the universe. She read him. In 3 seconds, she learned more about the structure of partial ascension than the ancients had left in any database. Anubis recoiled, not physically, because he did not fully inhabit the physical, but in a way that was unmistakably a recoil. The half-translucent form flickered. For a fraction of a moment, something that was not godhood and not power showed through the gaps, something old and isolated and furious at both conditions. Download complete, 7 said. Tuvok, Janeway said. Tuvok had already calculated the yield. His phaser fired. Not at Anubis, whom a phaser could not meaningfully harm, but at the archive interface column. The crystal shattered in a cascade of light and data, the physical connection between the archive's records and the chamber's systems severing in a burst of controlled energy. The data was in 7's Borg-enhanced memory. The original was gone. Anubis could not use what he could not read. Run, Janeway said. They ran. Above them, through the station's hull, Voyager was fighting. Chakotay's voice coming through the communicator in the controlled bursts of a commander managing a 3-on-1 engagement with the specific competence of someone who had learned from the best. Photon torpedoes striking ancient enhanced shields, phaser arrays cutting through Hatak hulls with surgical precision, Tom Paris threading Voyager through firing solutions that should not have been survivable and were, because Tom Paris at the helm was one of the few variables in any tactical equation that consistently outperformed its theoretical maximum. The Jaffa in the corridor were 4, as Tuvok had estimated. They were down in 11 seconds. Tuvok's phaser and Janeway's working in the coordinated rhythm of people who had run enough corridors together to have stopped needing to communicate about it. The Cochrane was where they had left it. The docking port released them into the void with the same unhurried ancient dignity with which it had received them, and Tuvok pushed the shuttles. Precise that 7 had triple verified it against the archive data before transmitting it to engineering, because precision here was not a preference but an absolute condition of survival. Get the frequency wrong by a single variable and they would not arrive home. They would arrive somewhere. Conduit is stable, B'Elanna reported from engineering, her voice carrying the particular tension of an engineer who had built something she was not entirely sure would hold. Quantum frequency locked at 7 specified parameters. Subspace wall integrity it's holding. For now. For now is enough, Janeway said from the command chair. Tom, take us in. Behind Voyager, Anubis's fleet was reorienting with the coordinated fury of a commander who had been outmaneuvered and was not yet finished. For Hatak vessels had broken from the Tartarus formation and were closing at maximum speed, their weapons powering, their sensor arrays locked on Voyager's hull with the focused attention of systems that had been told, by their commander's rage, that this ship could not be allowed to leave. The remaining vessels were holding position. Anubis himself, Chakotay suspected from the tactical display, was reassessing. A partially ascended being of ancient knowledge did not commit his entire fleet to a pursuit without understanding where the pursued vessel was going, because partial ascension meant you were still capable of understanding that some doors, once opened, could not be closed. He knew about the conduit. He had felt the transwarp interaction with his relay gate. He understood, at a level that none of his System Lord contemporaries could have reached, that what Voyager was about to do was not simply escape, it was a demonstration that the dimensional boundary he had considered absolute was permeable. And Anubis, above all things, could not allow a demonstration of permeability to exist without controlling it. Which was why the weapon's fire that struck Voyager's aft shields as Tom Paris threaded her into the conduit's mouth was not a Hotak plasma burst. It was something else. Something that hit with a frequency that made the shield geometry stutter in ways that standard Goa'uld weaponry had never managed to produce. An ancient derived energy weapon, fired from the station itself, calibrated to interfere with subspace geometry rather than simply damage physical hull. He was trying to collapse the conduit. Shields at 61%, Tuvok reported. The weapon frequency is targeting our subspace field coherence. If it achieves resonance lock, the conduit will destabilize. B'Elanna, Janeway said. Already on it. Torres was not panicking. B'Elanna never panicked, she converted panic into engineering velocity and produced solutions at a rate that consistently outpaced the problems generating them. I'm modulating the conduit subspace wall frequency in rotating increments. If I can keep the variation faster than his targeting cycle can compensate, he can't achieve resonance lock. A pause filled with the sound of console inputs moving at speed. But I need 3 minutes, Captain. The conduit needs 3 minutes at stable geometry to complete the quantum transit. Tom, Janeway said. I heard her, Paris said. His hands were already moving. Evasive pattern within the conduit, it's like flying inside a tunnel, but the tunnel is made of math and any mistake collapses both the tunnel and us. A pause that contained approximately 4 seconds of Tom Paris doing something with the helm that the Intrepid-class designers had not specifically anticipated and that worked anyway because he was Tom Paris. So basically a Tuesday. The conduit walls flickered around them, the ancient quantum frequency holding in sevens. Specified parameters while B'Elanna's rotating modulation kept Anubis's targeting cycle perpetually one step behind its resonance lock. On the aft sensors, the 4 pursuing Hotak vessels had reached the conduit mouth and stopped, their captains understanding, at an instinctive tactical level if not a physics one, that following a vessel into a transwarp conduit without understanding the conduit's destination was the kind of decision that ended careers and ships simultaneously. Only Anubis pressed the weapon. The second strike hit harder. He had compensated for the modulation, partially, enough to achieve a glancing resonance contact that made the conduit walls shudder in a way that Janeway felt through the deck plating and that B'Elanna felt through the engineering console and that Seven felt through the mathematical model she was running continuously in her Borg-enhanced processing to verify the quantum frequency was holding. Frequency drift, Seven said. 0.03 variance. Compensating. Shields at 44%, Tuvok said. 2 minutes, B'Elanna said. The third strike did not come. What came instead was something that Janeway would spend considerable time afterward trying to understand and would eventually conclude was simply the consequence of Anubis being what he was. Not merely a Goa'uld, not merely a warlord, but a being of partial ascension who had spent 10,000 years acquiring knowledge and power and who understood, at the level where knowledge and instinct merged, that the moment Voyager passed through the quantum boundary, the information 7 of 9 carried in her neural architecture would be beyond his reach permanently. He made a choice. He stopped firing. Not from mercy. Anubis had no relationship with mercy that any living being had ever been able to identify. But from calculation. Because a being of ancient knowledge understood what the dimensional transit represented better than anyone else in this galaxy. And what it represented was a door. A door that had opened once could open again. And Anubis, who had spent his existence acquiring things rather than destroying them when acquisition remained possible, had decided that a door was more useful than its absence. He would wait. He would learn. He would find another way. 1 minute, B'Elanna said. Her voice had changed slightly, the tension still present but underlaid now with something that sounded like, and was, cautious hope. The kind that engineers permitted themselves when the math was working and the components were holding, and the disaster that had seemed inevitable was, possibly, failing to materialize on schedule. Janeway sat in the command chair and held the ship in her awareness the way she always held it. Not through the sensor displays, not through the tactical readouts, but through the specific felt sense of a commander who had spent enough years in this chair that the ship's condition registered in her nervous system the same way her own body's condition did. Voyager was intact. Her crew was at their stations, doing what they did, being what they were. The specific collection of improbable people that 7 years of displacement and survival had shaped into something that was, by any honest assessment, extraordinary. She thought about Hammond, standing in the gate room when she had transmitted her final communication from the shuttle. The measured warmth of a general who had spent a career learning to trust his instincts about people and had extended that trust to a starship captain from another universe with the deliberate generosity of someone who understood that the alternative to trust was isolation, and isolation was the one thing you could not afford in a galaxy full of false gods. She thought about O'Neill, who had said, when she reached him on the comm from the Cochrane during their exit from the station, exactly 4 words. 4 words that contained the specific compression of a man who had saved the world enough times to have stopped finding elaborate language for it. Good. See you never. Which was, she had decided, his version of the highest compliment. She thought about Daniel Jackson, who had transmitted a final data packet to 7 Station 30 seconds before conduit entry. 3 years of ancient language research, compressed and annotated, a gift from a scholar to the people who had confirmed that his life's work was not merely academic but foundational to the structure of the universe itself. She thought about Carter, who had transmitted nothing verbal but had included in the engineering data handoff a complete technical analysis of Naquadah resonance principles in Federation-compatible format, which was Sam Carter's version of saying "I hope we meet again" in the only language she fully trusted. 30 seconds, B'Elanna said. And then, with the particular quality of someone who had been holding their breath for 3 minutes and was only now permitting themselves to begin releasing it, Captain, the quantum frequency is holding perfect. 7's parameters are exact. We are going to the right place. 7, at the astrometrics relay she had jury-rigged to the conduit navigation system, looked at the data flowing through her console with the focused attention that was her version of prayer. The complete commitment of every cognitive resource she possessed to a single desired outcome. Confirmed, she said. Quantum transit in 15 seconds. Destination frequency matches our universe of origin to 17 decimal places. Mr. Kim, Janeway said. Yes, Captain. Harry's voice, from Ops, carried the anticipatory quality of someone trying very hard not to sound as relieved as he was. The moment we transit, I want a full sensor sweep. I want to know where we are in our galaxy. She paused. And Harry, look at the stars. He understood immediately. She heard it in the brief silence before his response. Yes, Captain. The conduit delivered them home the way the deep space gate had taken them. Without ceremony, without warning, with the absolute physical indifference of a universe that did not track individual journeys and had no mechanism for acknowledging the weight of return. One moment the conduit walls surrounded them, ancient mathematics holding the dimensional boundary open through 7's precision and B'Elanna's engineering and the fundamental stubborn refusal of this crew to be defeated by physics. The next moment, the conduit was gone and stars filled the view screen. Different stars. The right stars. Harry Kim ran his sensor sweep in the silence that followed the transit, and when he looked up from his console, his expression said everything before the words did, the specific quality of a young man who had spent 7 years trying to get home and was, now, unmistakably, recognizably, measurably there. "Captain," he said. "I know these stars." Janeway looked at the view screen for a long moment. The Delta Quadrant spread before them. Familiar in its alienness, recognizable in its remoteness, their quadrant, their universe, their long road still ahead. They were not home in the sense of Federation space and Starfleet command and the planet Earth. They were home in the sense that mattered most at this particular moment. They were in the right universe, breathing the right physics, under the right stars. She would take it. "Mr. Paris," she said. "Set a course for the Alpha Quadrant." She settled back in the command chair with the quiet satisfaction of a navigator who has found her bearing after a long drift. "Best possible speed." "Course laid in," Tom said. He glanced back at her with a grin that contained everything he didn't say. The relief, the pride, the specifically Tom Paris brand of delight in having survived something that probably shouldn't have been survivable. "Ready when you are." Janeway looked at the stars one final time, right stars, her stars, the stars of a universe that had an Alpha Quadrant and a Federation and a home that was still unreasonably far away and absolutely worth every light year between here and there. "Engage," she said. Voyager leaped forward into the dark. In another galaxy, the Stargate at Cheyenne Mountain stood silent for 3 hours after Voyager's conduit closed. Then it activated, unscheduled, unexplained, a brief pulse of energy that registered on SGC's monitors and brought Hammond and O'Neill to the gate room within 90 seconds. No traveler came through. No message followed. Only a single data packet, transmitted on a frequency that SGC's systems required Carter's modifications to read. A complete technical schematic of a transwarp conduit, annotated in English, with a brief header that read, "For when you need a faster door." Janeway. O'Neill read it twice. Then he looked at Hammond. "I like her," he said. Hammond permitted himself a small smile and said nothing, which was his version of complete agreement. Somewhere above Tartarus, Anubis held position and thought about doors. About the dimensional boundary that had proven permeable. About the crew of a ship from another universe who had walked into his station, taken what they needed, and left before he could stop them. About the data that no longer existed in his archive because a Vulcan's phaser had ensured it didn't. He was not finished. He was never finished. But for now, the stars above Tartarus were quiet, and in the silence between the galaxies, in the space where a transwarp conduit had briefly burned like a new star before closing forever, there was nothing left to mark that Voyager had ever been here at all. Except, perhaps, in the memory of the Stargate, ancient, patient, humming.